So this is my most recent picture book. It's called I Don't Like Snakes, and the don't is crossed out because, of course, we don't want to encourage children not to like snakes. And like all my non-fiction books, actually it combines fiction with non-fiction. The information is real, but it's packaged up in a story and with characters that I've entirely invented. And I really like that combination of fiction and non-fiction. What's important to me is packaging up my information in a narrative, and that narrative might take the form of a story with characters, it might take the form of an essay, it might take the form of a poem. But a narrative is just a very good psychological carrier bag for information. And in this case, it's information about snakes, taking as its jumping off point the fact that most people find them absolutely hideous. Now, when I was a little girl, I really loved snakes, but you didn't really see pet snakes when I was a kid. Otherwise, I really would have wanted one. But the one thing that we had in our garden was we had frogs. And my mum really didn't like frogs. She was pretty tolerant of most of the animals that I brought into the house, you know, birds with broken wings, snails, beetles, various kinds of bugs. But when it came to frogs, she totally freaked out and would literally scream and yell and get me to take them back in the garden. And I could never believe this. I couldn't believe that somebody didn't like frogs. So I'd keep presenting her with frogs, you know, saying, look at their lovely skin, look at their webbed feet, look at their cute little throats that go in and out. And of course, all of it just freaked my poor mother out. So I was kind of remembering that when I started to write this book. So I was able to put myself into the perspective of a child who really didn't like snakes, in spite of the fact that I've always really liked them. In fact, my daughter, when I was a kid, when she was a kid, kept snakes. We had various sorts of snakes, all of which escaped at one time or another. And because the house we were living in at the time was absolutely freezing, they were usually quite hard to find because they'd go behind the radiator and you'd pull them out like a piece of string from behind the radiator. But one time, a snake got out because my daughter had left the lid off the tank, and the snake had gone out exploring only to discover that the world it was exploring was freezing and it didn't like it at all. Couldn't find it anywhere. Wasn't behind the radiator, wasn't under the quilt on the bed, none of the usual places. And I, in the end, gave up looking for it, flopped down on my daughter's bed, and in despair that I was never going to find this snake. And at that point, I was lower than her lamp, and I was looking up at her lamp beside the bed. And this poor little snake, it was a little baby corn snake about this length, had wrapped itself around the light bulb because the light bulb was the only source of warmth in the entire room, poor little thing. So that's something else I had in my mind when I was writing this book. And the excitement of seeing snakes in the wild. We don't have many species of snakes in the UK, but I have seen wild vipers, adders we call them, with their fantastic zigzag black pattern down their backs, basking out on rocks in Pembrokeshire, the favourite part of Wales where I go when I've got downtime. And last year, when I was travelling in Louisiana, I had my first sight of a properly dangerous snake. I was crossing a creek, and just in front of me on the little beach, wiggling up the side, was a great big black cottonmouth, fantastic, huge, fat snake. And I think we were both pretty terrified at that point. The snake disappeared pretty quickly, and I backtracked pretty quickly. So all of those experiences have in some way gone into this book about a little girl who at first doesn't like snakes and finally comes round to liking them very much, although I was never able to convince my mother about the frogs.